So, how about this for a discussion? And I already touched on this a little with a couple of books I've been recommending. I'll reiterate. I've got Climate Leviathan, Joel Wainwright, and Jeff Mann. And the other one is How to Blow Up a Pipeline by Andreas Malm. The latter is an argument about pacifism and nonviolent resistance and civil disobedience that people have engaged in historically to fight climate change. And so this is the shape of the discussion, right? We here at Red Planet don't endorse anyone doing anything illegal, but we do think that it's reaching an inevitable point where the state has not responded to civil disobedience, right? So this is a distinction that's going to be important going forward in the show between things that we are advocating. We are advocating for civil disobedience and legal forms of activism and pacifism and going on strike and things like this. Go talk to your neighbors, join a union, grow networks of mutual aid. However, we do think it's inevitable people are going to be doing things like, as the book How to Blow Up a Pipeline talks about, like sabotaging oil pipelines, things that are constructing and harming the environment, this just literally smashing the machinery that is doing the direct harm to the planet and setting our world on fire and bringing us all closer to extinction.
And it's already happening as well. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You know, we're essentially commenting on what is already happening.
Exactly. And yeah, so that's the shape of what we're going to talk about across the show. But like, do people have any thoughts about this kind of distinction between these two things, these two kinds of things?
Yeah. And I think like there's also like when you start thinking about a lot of this stuff, like, and you'll see why a lot of the really good organizations kind of address, you know, like they may be like just like, you know, a prison abolition organization or something like that, but they might also have, you know, like official stances on land reform and things like that. Is because once you start kind of looking into these things, you realize how it's all kind of connected, you know, like the way that people utilize land, the way that land is owned under kind of, you know, capitalism or whatever like that. It's tied into these things. It stops people from being like the commodification of the land stops things like communal gardens kind of thing from happening.
Yeah,
because
totally.
once that, you know, like it's like a domino thing. It's like once you start changing the way that we relate to this, then, you know, like the whole thing just, you know, like the house of cards starts waving a little bit.
Exactly.
So I think like it's good to keep a lot of that stuff in mind when you're looking at organizations and stuff. Same thing with like unions and stuff. Just
absolutely, yeah. But Mule, you were going to talk about the.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Yeah, no worries.
Between different things.
So yeah, in terms of well, I don't know if this matches what you want me to talk about, Sophie, but in terms
we're all seeing that I secretly pull the strings here at Red Planet.
That's right. No, but I mean, like, directly answers the question. But the way that I see it is that, like, it doesn't even have to take, like, you know, obviously we're talking about this book, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, and obviously we're not telling people to go and blow up a pipeline, but it is inevitable, right? But it doesn't necessarily have to take that form, you know? So, you know, if we talk about the Wet'suwet'en people who are struggling in the land known as Canada now, right? And they are actively, it's sabotage, but then the word sabotage is loaded, right? It's loaded. It makes you think like, oh, this is nasty, it's gross, and it's like, well, actually, no. All they're doing is they are like getting a what do you call it? Just a digger, right? A caterpillar thing,
bobcat digger thing.
Yeah, right. And they're just driving it to their land and just being like, sorry, that's ours now. You can't use it, and then using it to just like build ditches in the road to stop the construction workers from actually getting to the construction site they need to complete the pipeline. And it's as simple as stuff like that, really, that we're gonna see so many more instances of this. I was also hearing on a stream recently, I think maybe you watched this, Nicole, but I can't remember, about the people of Hawaii who are like currently protesting about the Navy's. They have like an oil. You know about this,
fuel.
Tim?
It's It's
right.
Anyone that wants to see more about this, maybe tune into Silver Spook's stream.
That's right.
Or follow Silver Spook on Twitter. But so the Navy has been leaking fuel out into the water. It's really fucked up, and it's been going on for ages. It's like literally poisoning people, even poisoning the Navy themselves, and they're getting defectors, people from the Navy being like, this is fucked up, like, you know, and joining the locals. But yeah, and it's the same thing that's happened.
We think that like QAnon, like eating ivermectin or whatever, because they're so wildly crazy because they believe in wild shit. But it's like the Navy are poisoning themselves because like American imperialism is just as much of a fucking brainworm as fucking QAnon.
Oh
my god.
But yeah, and I mean like there's like there's a lot of similar struggles going on down here at the moment. Like a little while back we had the whole thing with Iamata. We've got at the moment we've got a couple, like one notable one is Putaki, which is on Waiheke, a small island just off just like, you know, in the harbor of Auckland, where it's like you know, and like in all these cases, even over in Canada and Hawaii and stuff, a lot of the time the state or the developers and stuff, they're the ones breaking the laws. They're the ones you know, illegally and stuff. But like the thing is, like, you know, like for capital, it doesn't matter, you know, like it yeah, and like I think at a lot of these times when you kind of see the apparatus of the state become really transparent, where it's like, okay, there's a developer that has signed a shady deal, but they have like the police or sometimes even the army enforcing it for them, you know? And I think like a lot of these things can be like really radicalizing moments for a lot of people. But it's I think it is also one of those things where you I think a lot of people kind of tune them out a little bit, especially in like leftist spaces. A lot of people tune out a lot of indigenous kind of like land struggles because they kind of think like, oh, that's like always been happening, or like, oh, it's just, you know, it's stuff from the past and they need to kind of get past it. But I think that everyone here, I think it would benefit for them to maybe just look into that stuff a little bit. Like I said, follow Silver Spook if you want to hear about the stuff in Hawaii. There's plenty of people out there. Just off the top of my head, I'm like totally blanking. But I often talk a lot about
Iamato, Anarchist Federation's magazine, Organize, which I'm subscribed to. Actually, their most recent issue did an article on Iamato.
Oh wow, so I didn't know that. Yeah,
it's something cool you can check out too.
Yeah, cool. And I think these also kind of help in the way that we can look at, you know, like when these things are successful, what's happening and all this kind of stuff like that. There are a lot of you know, I think that there's a lot of like organizations like, you know, communist or anarchist orgs that could probably like, I think a lot of the time the goals are like simpatico, you know. It's like the guys are the goals are aligned a lot more than what people think. And I think it's
it's completely true. I think you're completely right. Like I think we need to be like, I think that the coming resistance to the systems that are killing all of us, are gonna, the resistance that we will see will learn from indigenous people the world over in settler colonial states, because like as much as like white leftists think really arrogantly like it's you know, that, like you said, it's always been going on, you know, nothing to be done about that, it's whatever, like it has been like indigenous people's struggle has been going on since the beginning of whichever settler colonial state you want to look at, and therefore the indigenous people have the most experience about resisting the state to learn from, and a long list of wins as well, as like, you know, we all kind of assume, I guess that's the real arrogance, right, of white leftists is like assuming because the settler colonialist state, be it, you know, New Zealand or America or whatever, like because it exists, the indigenous people must have by definition just lost and it's over. And it's actually like, well, no, like a whole bunch of whiteys like are there agreeing to pretend there's a thing there called America or agreeing to pretend there's a thing there called Canada or New Zealand, but like that's not game over, you know, like
and I think it's like I think Alexia Clara, who I think I read out a comment of theirs earlier as well, says a lot of lefties unfortunately dismissive of stuff like land bank. I think it's like when you actually talk to a lot of people about it and you explain like, you know, like land back as kind of like a slogan for like land reform and stuff, like a lot of people that are communists and anarchists are like, oh yeah, I absolutely agree with that. You know, like they're like, yeah, no, they're like, but that's the thing we're saying, and it's like, yeah, no, but that's the thing that we've been saying for a long time, and you know, like it's kind of, yeah, it is frustrating, but I think we're getting there with a lot of people, and I think a lot of people that didn't understand it, that kind of made fools of themselves on Twitter recently, you know, like no one in particular or whatever, actually like maybe even though initially it seemed like it was like kind of harming the cause, I think in a roundabout way they kind of embarrassed themselves so thoroughly that a lot of people were exposed to the correct information eventually.
That's it.
Yeah,
actually,
I mean, like sorry, Nicole,
I'm going to say that leads me to a very natural declaration. One of the reasons we're doing this show, chat, is to set the new standard for Twitch politics, just political, leftist political stuff. We're not naming names, but many people have, like you said, embarrassed themselves and have been extraordinarily like problematic and bigoted and just, you know, I would say
they've been cringe.
Yeah, they were cringe. But unfortunately, this is like a style of so-called leftism on the internet that is so thoroughly popularized for whatever reason, this monster that's been created. So one of the reasons what we wanted to create this show is not only the things that we're talking about, but also to set the new standard for Twitch politics, and just, you know, not just Twitch, but you know what I mean, Twitch politics, internet politics on the left. And so when this show continues, we're going to have it every single Sunday. We're going to, if you like the format and you want to copy it on your own side, on your own show, we encourage you to do so. Please want you to do this.
Yeah.
100%. We will, if you want us to like help in any way, you know, reach out to us. We'll see what we can do, but like we encourage you to create a trend out of this, because having it all in one stream is a lot. It's you know, we want to spread the wealth. Spread the wealth.
Frankly, like if there's stuff that like if you agree with us that revolution is inevitable, that this is what people are going to be doing, and you want to get on a show and talk about it, like fucking go ahead. If you think that we aren't covering something very well, that's great news. We want everything to be covered as well as possible. And so if you think we're doing a bad job, fucking do a better job. Like we would love that. But yeah, like I think it would be fair to say we all again, we're not interested in drama, or we're not interested in naming names, but like there has been a streak of what's been describing itself as patriotic socialism, and is really just a red-brown thing, which has been the most extreme critics isn't even the right word, just decriers of land back and indigenous self-determination, because a whole bunch of people have been acting like you can be a communist and love America, and you can't. Sorry, sweetie, bad news. Go home. You're drunk.
That's leftist for aesthetics, right?
But like that's one thing. Like when we say, you know, what Tim's been saying and what I was saying, like, you know, indigenous people will absolutely be the people that like so many leftists are learning from in this struggle. It's just, that's factually true. And when people position themselves opposing to that, they're not only just morally wrong or wrong in like a political discourse sense or whatever, they are cutting themselves off from, like, once again, the people who have literally the most historic experience of resisting the existing capitalists framework, right? They are cutting themselves off from this, and like, you know, white folks who think that they can just dictate the entirety of something, for that matter cis folks, for that matter het folks, for that matter able-bodied folks who think they can dictate the entirety of something without hearing other perspectives, they're dinosaurs, and they're going to be left behind by the inevitable complete like need, not just like the practicality or the benefits, but the need to include everyone's voices and everyone's perspectives in. You know,
and it's also in terms of like the way that the way that we see things going with revolution being inevitable, they'll be left behind just by that, really, in general, because it's like, if you're just gonna, you know, not contribute anything towards the conversation of how we get to where we know things are going, then you're kind of defunct, you know. I remembered what I was supposed to say. So in talking about how the protesters in Hawaii are different to obviously what Wet Sweating people are doing, that is something to look at in terms of exactly what Nicole was saying, focusing on your immediate surroundings, right? Because it's not about, you know, everybody do the same thing. It's about do what your community needs you to do.
Yes.
Obviously, we all need to do things to fight climate change. That's obviously a given. That's a global issue. But I guess that's where the saying "think global, act local" comes from, right? You know what I mean? And I think people sort of bastardize that to mean whatever they want. You know what I mean? But in this case, you know, I'm being serious. It's like, what can you do in your immediate surrounding to aid us? You know, to aid the transition into communism kind of thing, because the Wet Sweating people are doing their bit, and you know, you could support them in many ways. You know, it's you know, same with the people of Hawaii, same with any other protest that's going on all over the world. But in terms of what we need to start seeing a dynamism, like an internal dynamism of, is people doing their own things in their own communities, especially in the Imperial Core. As you know, as we call it, you know, the UK, New Zealand, Australia, America, because that's where the rot is kind of, it's happening there. You know what I mean? That's where we're seeing a lot of stuff as well. That's where we're seeing the Kellogg strikes. That's where we're seeing, I don't know. You couldn't call that.
It will be a matter of life and death for communities in the imperial periphery to resist imperialism, and it always has been. And they will do it because it's a matter of life or death. And if you want to help them, one of the most important things you can do is be dropping out in the Imperial Core, withholding your labor, making the Imperial Core malfunction. Because make no mistake, like, it's not just that, like, first of all, you do benefit from imperialism if you're in the Imperial Core. It's a concept called the labor aristocracy. It's another reason why this patriotic socialism is a bunch of guff, because because
they're always saying that this doesn't happen.
Right.
Can you define Imperial Core, Imperial periphery for us real quick, for some people that don't know it?
So the countries that are the most direct beneficiaries of the current imperialism. So American imperialism is just one name that we have for a force that covers the entire world. You could call it the global system of debt. You could call it international capitalism. You could call it American imperialism. You could call it neoliberalism. You could call it climate change. They're actually all just names for facets of the same thing. And make no mistake, they absolutely are the same thing. But we call it American imperialism because America is the prime beneficiary of global capitalism right now. But like a whole ton of countries are the next to prime beneficiaries. Canada, all the European countries, Britain, RIP and pies, New Zealand, Australia, you know, and then there are countries that are imperial subjects, right? And they have their wealth, their labor, their natural resources, everything drained out of them for the benefit of the Imperial Core. That is the imperialist relationship. People should, I don't have it in the pile right now, but How the West Underdeveloped Africa, I think is the name. If people in the chat will probably know better than me, that's a good book about this. There are tons and tons of things that you can read about this, but we used to talk about the third world because of USSR, and then the third world. But that's an outdated term, obviously, because, well, for one, the USSR doesn't exist anymore. But then we would talk about the global north and the global south. I think the most useful term is the imperial core versus the imperial periphery. Basically, we're
I like this.
using different language and metaphors to describe richer and poorer countries, but it's also important to understand how they came to be that way and have language that describes the system that continues to keep them that way. There's another book which I recommend, which I haven't read, so this one, take that with this recommendation, but I'm intending to read soon, I've heard good things about, called Africa is Not Poor, Africa is Being Looted, right? So that's a good example of exactly what I'm talking about, that this imperialist relationship around the world is countries that are beneficiaries and countries that, or is it benefactors? No, beneficiaries. And then countries that are being looted actively. They're having things taken from them. So there you go. That's Imperial Core versus Imperial Periphery. And
it's a lot better than Global North and Global South, because
that always kind of confused me too.
Well, the Global North, it kind of implies white supremacism, because, you know, all the countries that are at the north of the map are like white countries, like, so to speak, right? And I was in a really, I think it was $27 stream. I was in a really good fucking bit of his stream where he was like showing like the map flipped, like if you've ever looked at the map of the world upside down, because of course it is just, there is no like set way to how it should be, right? You know, and it's it's a bit of an eye-opener, just like how big different countries are and how small other countries are.
But what I was saying was that this imperialism, it doesn't just create a higher quality of life and certain benefits and so on for people who are in the Imperial Core. It does actually rely on labor within the Imperial Core. Like, there are great engines of empire in every imperial subject country, right? And when those countries refuse to give their labor, their exports, etc., to imperialism, there is usually extremely violent pushback. Either in systemic violence or in explicit violence. So 2 examples, South Africa and Chile. Salvador Allende was assassinated and replaced with General Pinochet, who ran a murder, rape, and torture-loving regime where he brutalized the people of Chile to enforce not free market economics in the country. It didn't fucking matter what the economy of Chile was like. It was about creating global neoliberalism. So this is what I mean when I say that neoliberalism is just another name for global capitalism, American imperialism, etc. Is that like the violent regime of Pinochet was to give Chile's wealth to America. That was the purpose of it, right? People misconstrue this as being like they put in people who would create like a free market economy in that country. It doesn't fucking matter what the economy is in that country. It's defending free market ideology is the thing. So that's, you know, that's literal violence. And then there's like systemic violence, like in South Africa, where Nelson Mandela wasn't able to implement his Freedom Charter, which involved, like, for example, nationalizing South African gold mines because they had divorced South African Central Bank from control by the government. And so the government couldn't do shit without getting loans from the IMF and the World Bank, meaning those organizations, which are massive tools of American imperialism and global capitalism, they will only give money to countries if those countries enforce neoliberal economics. See, so that's systemic violence, right? And so the point is that and by the way, both of those examples talked about in a lot more detail in a really good book called The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. I cannot recommend it enough. It is like a regime, like a paradigm shifting book that like you read and then there's like your life before reading it and your life afterwards. It's an incredible book. But the point that I was making was that like countries in the imperial periphery that are being exploited will fight back because it is life or death and they have to. We in the Imperial Core have to both withhold our labor from the Imperial Core and support them.
If you donate.
And us withholding our labor is supporting them, because if the empire itself gets weaker and is unable to exploit them and unable to attack them, right, it will make their struggle easier. And it will also, like, if America doesn't feel like there's a thing worth like fighting for, basically, like if within America it's just like people are just completely withholding their labor, then what would they, they wouldn't be able to justify endless imperialist wars to the people based on the idea that it's for the people if the people are withholding their labor, is the point. There's a whole conversation to have here about the Vietnam War and the way that people who were encouraging a dropout culture in America were deliberately funneled into the American war machine to employ them, because the ruling class is terrified of working age adults who withhold their labor. Then it was, they were terrified of working age men. Now it's, hey, a little bit more gender equality. Yay. They'll probably conscript women too if they want to force hippies into working. But the point is, we advocate a lot that people drop out from the Imperial Core, and that we need to foster this dropout culture and grow like just a rot and a decay inside the Imperial Core. What the response to that will be is predictable, because it's literally happened before.
Yeah.
Something that I will doubtless say 1,000 times on this show is that the hippie movement is represented in popular media as this ineffectual, lovey-dovey, drug-addled, free, open your mind, so on and so forth. And that's because those elements that did exist have had the context of leftism removed from them to defang them in popular fiction, to pretend that it wasn't nearly, which it was, that it wasn't nearly a communist revolution in America in the 60s and 70s. Yeah. It was nearly that. The American ruling class really doesn't want you to know that, so they don't. Yeah. So they don't portray it. They portray hippies as useless idiots.
Well, Nixon did a number on creating that imagery with the war on drugs.
Yeah.
By saying that's the reason why he made marijuana illegal, was to criminalize being a hippie, essentially, and to demonize.
And that's why so many people were forcibly conscripted into the Vietnam War. Is my point, is because they needed to get this population and force them into the machine.
Fat Gingerbeard says any direct action training in the future, and I think that can be like there's lots of types of direct action. So I mean, there definitely will be.
Yeah.
Right, like we're going to be speaking to organizers, we're going to be speaking to activists, and they're going to be, teaching us all about, stuff like that. But of course, it's a broad subject. So,
yeah. I mean, I think one thing we'll definitely do, and I'm trying to organize at the moment, is for us to be able to talk about arrest resistance and arrest support training. There are people who organize to be able to to train people to be able to not get to be able to not get arrested by cops. We're not talking about people who are just like doing insert bad thing that you think is bad and deserves the police punishment, if that's a thing you believe in. But we're not talking about that, but like people who are at a protest, who are trying to protest stuff, and the cops start giving them shit. Like there is training that you can be given about what things you should bring to a protest, how you should behave, what you can do, and if you do get arrested, or if a friend of yours get arrested, what you can do from the inside and what they can do to support you, or rather you could do to support your friend if they are arrested. Like, for example, I know that a lot of cops will just like boot people back out, and like the sensible advice, like if you are trying to not get like caught up in endless nonsense and get like charged with something completely garbage just to run up your like legal fees and disable your ability to protest, like which is a thing cops do, right? Part of the advice that they give to people is to like not bring your phone and like not bring ID, because one thing that cops will do is they will withhold your ID from you or withhold your phone from you, meaning that you can't just be like, let me go. But then when you do that, cops will often just like, they will have taken you to the police station, they'll dump you out on the street, and you won't have eaten, you'll be tired as fuck, you'll be cold, you won't have your money or anything to get home with, and they've done that on purpose, right? And that's where arrest support networks come in. So that's, for an example of an episode that I'm trying to organize to get someone on to talk about that stuff. But like, we won't necessarily be giving that training in the episode. We might go over some of those details, like the ones I just outlined. But like, the point is highlighting people so that you all, if you're really interested in that kind of stuff, can go to that person who we'd have on, or other people like them in your area or whatever, and receive that training off the show. This is like a space where we can highlight stuff.
100%.
And Gray says it would be nice to hear a bit of history on the labor movement in the 20th century and how workers then got results with a lot of pain and suffering, but what we gain from it and how we can make those changes in the future as a labor movement. I don't know how far back we'll be going. I know that we'll definitely, like we were talking about a number of, we talked about India's recent general strike a number of times. That's history. But I don't know. What did y'all think about, like?
I think there are.
I think learning about what we did that worked is important. So sorry, go ahead.
I think it's always important to learn history of like places where people have tried stuff and it's worked, and to take lessons from that. But it's also important to put things in their historical context. For example, if you just look at people winning strikes in the 1920s or something, like there are some examples from specifically around the 20s, when organized crime was incredibly involved on both sides of labor disputes. Sometimes organized crime families would involve themselves on the side of a union. Sometimes they would involve themselves on the side of the state and union busters, right? So it's like, so that would be a historical context example of like, that's not the case now, right? And so to look at a struggle where there's this extra force behind it that we're not, and ignore that basically, and pretend like we can apply the lessons from it directly to our own time, would be an example where it would be difficult. But I totally think we should be learning history, and we should be talking about history and historical examples of victories.
I also think it's a really good idea to just reinforce that the direct action, does get the goods. It has in history, and it will, in the coming sort of few years, well, the coming decades, really. Because again, that's all part of hopium, right? It's all part of like, this stuff happens. Like, we wouldn't have the 5-day week if it wasn't, we wouldn't have the weekend if it wasn't for labor movements. We wouldn't have Christmas holidays. We wouldn't have, all this kind of stuff. So, of course, it's really important to look back at that stuff and go, yeah, sweet. I mean, personally, it's like, I think the idea is to sort of encourage people, not just encourage people, but such as predict what's going to happen like in the future as well. And also, just little bits about what you could do now, because our sort of like conversation is how we can get to where we want to be, because the idea is we don't want to let capitalism hurt as much as it possibly can. So it's great to talk about the past, but it is also about like, it's progressivism. That's what we're trying to do as leftists. We're trying to, progress things, right?
Also,
I think that.
Go ahead, please.
Sorry. Okay. I've recommended this already a couple of times. I'll recommend it again. How to Blow Up a Pipeline by Andreas Malm is a book that I think is really, really good. I'm buying it as a Christmas present for all my fellow co-hosts, because I think it's that cool and I want people to check it out. And it's actually full of not just like stuff that has been done, but stuff that you can do. Andreas Malm himself was part of a movement. It's a more cringe side of the book, because there's a little bit of like weird appropriation that they did with the naming of the thing. I won't get into that now, but like the thing that they were doing was basically like sabotaging SUVs in rich neighborhoods, and because they're such massive gas guzzlers. And that might sound like myopic and focused on consumer choice and whatever, but they drove down the amount people were buying SUVs in the whole country of Sweden by 26%, because people didn't want to get SUVs because they didn't want to get their fucking tires slashed. And that's an example of like an action where people were, doing something and it had a direct result in the direction that you want it to go in. You want fewer people to get the SUVs, and you make it inconvenient for SUV owners, and most people don't get SUVs then. Like it's a measurable thing. And that's a great, a great resource that I recommend to people.
Absolutely. And it only harms capital, right? It only harms capital at the end of the day.
There's a lot of really great questions in the chat. I'm gonna read Lizard's question because I don't recall if this is one of the topics that we said we were going to talk about, but Lizard says, would people like resources and ideas for people with kids? Like, I want to protest and I plan on it for the future, but I can't risk getting arrested or find a babysitter, but I really want to get involved in any way I can. Plus my kids are too young to get vaccinated, so we are pretty much still very quarantined. I don't know if we're going to have a conversation about like protesting or protest culture. I don't think we talked about this, but I think that perhaps if we haven't, maybe we should talk about it off stream. But I think that might be when people like it. I think a lot of people think that activism equals physical, like physically leaving your house, physically putting your body in harm's way, physically holding a sign, and then just like being a sitting duck for the cops. And then if enough people do that, then that's gonna solve the problem.
Right.
I don't want to go too off script here because I don't know how.
To be fair, it probably does involve leaving your house. I will say that one. Most direct action probably does involve leaving your house.
Yeah, sure. But I'm guessing protest is like exclusively, it's not like leaving the house and going somewhere. The activity is to exit any building and just stand in a street. I don't think we had this conversation off stream, and maybe we should have that, but I have a lot of, I think it'd be good to have at least a brief conversation one of these days about like this protest culture that I find to be pretty concerning, and also pretty it's kind of counterproductive and potentially harmful for the point of like keeping people safe. We're not here, Chad, to treat you like sitting ducks and like who cares how many of you go down or something. Like we need to remember that all of our lives have value. The reason I'm a communist is because I think every human life has value. Every life, well, I'm vegan too, but like every like life has value, and I don't think, and it shouldn't be contingent upon like the amount of labor you produce or the amount of money you have or any of the how hot you are or something, or like how much you can bench, like any of these things. Every life has value, and if you are watching right now, you're worthy of love, you're worthy of respect, dignity, you know, a home, food, love. Like these are all things I believe in. That being said, I don't feel comfortable trying to employ that philosophy by like putting people in harm's way. Obviously, this is a violent world. Capitalism is always harming us as we speak. So that's the reality of things. But I think it'd be, at least personally for me, I would like to have a conversation about what is doing stuff and what is maybe not doing stuff.
I think there's a good conversation to be had in there. I think that to answer the direct question about like involving kids and stuff, we've already made this distinction, right, between the legal actions that we do endorse and the things that break the rules, involve more danger, etc., that we aren't endorsing on the show. We are simply reporting on. Exactly. And I would say, as a general rule of thumb, and this isn't always the case, but as a general rule of thumb, the former, the civil disobedience, this going to protests and so on, there's often kids at protests, and including like not just marches that are bigger, and a concern expressed in chat was like to do with vaccinations, right? But also like smaller protests. Like I've been involved in a protest that was outside the offices of a housing organization who were treating their like tenants like complete shit. Like there was mold all over the walls. There was like the ceiling was fucking raining from leaking pipes, shit like this. None of the lights worked. This woman who had like a stroke and has 2 kids, she was struggling in this horrible place, and the housing association, which is supposed to be like a non-profit to benefit the tenants, was like treating her like shit and completely ignoring the situation, right? And you know, and that's just one story of a ton for that housing association. And I was involved in a protest which was very few people, but we were there and we were drawing attention to what fucking scumbags they were, right? And it helped to get demands met, even though it was like a dozen of us just outside with a megaphone, handing a letter, and there were kids there. There were kids there who were like being adorable with their signs, who would come with, you know, their mom or something, you know, to be at the protest and just take part in it. And yeah, I would say, again, just rule of thumb, not totally true, but rule of thumb, like protests can usually be a pretty safe place for kids, unless it's like a protest that you suspect is gonna kick off or like have fascist counter-protesters show up or shit like this. But like generally speaking, you know, there are a ton of stuff within civil disobedience and legal resistances that like are completely kid-friendly. But then also there's a lot that isn't kid-friendly, but that's just makes sense because there wouldn't be, you know.
And when we're talking about things like mutual aid networks, like those things tend to be incredibly kid friendly. Like volunteering in your immediate community is, you know, and again, we are not endorsing anything violent. We're endorsing you know, those kinds of things that are completely safe to do, but actually, you know, aid, you know, and speed up the end of capitalism, essentially.
Violence has come up a bunch in this discussion, and someone said in chat something that I thought would be a good place to go next for the discussion, which was, is it against Twitch terms of service to talk about revolutionary working class militias? Yes. Next question. No, I'm kidding. In all seriousness, you know, once again, we are not endorsing anything illegal at all, and certainly not endorsing violence. And it is important to understand that as you build systems of mutual aid that support people, both the capitalist state and awful brainworms fascists will bring violence to you And so there is absolutely a conversation about self-defense and community defense and protecting yourselves. But the thing is, it's not necessarily a conversation about violence. Not right away, anyway. If you are to have those conversations, those are conversations that you want to have with the people you are practically organizing with in a serious and practical sense, not one that you want to have with some Twitch streamers, if you get me. But even then, there's plenty of like stuff in, if you did want to learn about that stuff, those resources exist, just out there. But one thing to understand is that tactically speaking, not being the victim of violence, right? There is a thing called, Nicole, maybe you could get this up. It's called, I think, the Survivability Onion. I think that's the name of it. And so basically this is a diagram which is about how to survive in the case where there is an armed opponent, right? And it's because there are layers to it, right? And only the smallest part of the onion is going to be like, don't die if you're shot. The next one up from that is going to be, don't get shot, right? But like actually the outermost one is like, I can't remember if it's like, don't be seen, right? Or maybe even like, don't be there. Yeah, there are a few different versions, but like the thing is that the biggest and most important layer of that is actually going to always, in the same case for there's an armed opponent thing, right? We can use this metaphor to understand how people need to think about the violence that will come after them for trying to just feed homeless people.
Mm-hmm.
The most important step, the most important first one is actually going to be, don't be seen, rather than learn how to fight a cop or something. Like, there are lots of really important conversations to have there. The first and most fundamental thing is that they are actually conversations about self-defense, not about fighting to do a violent like push towards the thing that doesn't actually serve our goals. The thing is, fascists' main aggrievement is that they do not control the state monopoly on violence. That's why they cry and shit and piss and come whenever police don't agree with them. It's an observable thing, okay? Like, MAGA fascists will freak the fuck out if police aren't on their side with something that they're doing.
And in the UK as well.
Totally, yeah.
Whereas we expect it.
Yeah.
That's our expectation.
But like, that the state monopoly on violence agreeing with fascists, that's their main aggrievement. And so fascists' ultimate goal is to control the monopoly on violence. That's why so many fascists deliberately involve themselves in the army and the police and so on, right? Communists' end goal isn't to control the monopoly on violence. So it's just not a conversation that we should be having framed in those terms. If that makes sense to people, like, it's actually just not our goal. In the same way that if I were talking about TERFs on Twitter, right? TERFs want trans people to not exist. On Twitter, they want trans people to not post, right? And so that's why TERFs organize in mass reporting campaigns to try and get trans people's accounts banned and shut down. We don't do the same to them, not because we're not organized. Okay, we're not. But because our goal isn't for TERFs to not exist, except the same people should exist. They just shouldn't be bigots. We want to just live our lives and be left alone. We're not actually, our end goal isn't an aggressive one in that way. So I hope that analogy makes sense, and I hope that all made sense to people.
I don't know if we moved on from this. Sorry, go on, Nicole.
I was going to say, what you're saying reminds me so much of Angela Davis, this video, Angela Davis on Violence and Revolution. It's super short. You can even watch it on stream right now if you want, but I'd rather continue the conversation. This video is awesome. Angela Davis kind of just talks about what you're talking about, which is like this idea that Black people are being like attacked, and so they decide one day to take up arms and just like try to just patrol their neighborhood to like keep themselves and their family and friends safe, because people are just being murdered and blown up, and there's like it's just horrible. And how someone would be like, why do you choose violence? This insistence on reframing the conversation to be like, if you are trying to fight, if you're trying to just defend yourself from violence, which will necessarily lead to you trying to, I don't know, barricade yourself, and if they get through a barricade, then what? If you resist dying, that is somehow violence. This reframing is really harmful, I think, and it completely doesn't make any sense.
Like, there's a philosophical root to that, which Fanon explores, right, where black skin in just existing in white society does violence to white people who don't consider black people to be an acceptable type of human being to be. So when a black person exists and just is a human being, white people feel like there's a violence being done to them, and that's when the their systemic violence is like, they see it as this like back and forth, exactly the same thing.
And it's interesting as well that, like, because you said there was a few people talking about violence, right, in the chat. Right. And it's interesting that is like, you know, on this first stream where we've sat down and we've explained to you many like non-violent ways that you can benefit society, that it is instilled in us. And I'm not going to go at your chat, because this is just capitalist brainwashing. Right. They make you think the only way out of this is violence, which immediately makes you think, nah, sorry, not doing it. And it's not the case.
Can I interject one thing? It's a real quick thing, but it's something I've been thinking a lot recently, is how much defenders of the status quo will insist that instability of the state will primarily harm minorities. And like, fascists will rise up and they will come after minorities, but this is a thing you are told to disincentivize you from wanting to change anything, because it's literally an abuse tactic where defenders of the status quo are saying, if you try and make anything better, I will make it way worse for you because you tried to improve things. Carry on, Mule. You're on the money.
Well, that's it really. At the end of the day, like, we're told that, like, you know, the only way to do things, and it goes back to that inaccessibility of theory, that inaccessibility of politics as well, that it's like, you know, the only thing that you can do is vote. That's all you can do. And if it doesn't work out that way, sorry, bro, you're fucked, right? You know, so in terms of like people saying like, oh, but what about violence? What about violence? It's like, no. They want you to think that you have to be violent. They want to drag you down to their level, because that's all capitalism and fascism understands is violence. You know, capitalism has the monopoly not just on violence, you know, physical violence, but you know, financial violence, and it's their language, and you're speaking in their language when you know, when we talk about violence. So
well, when we talk about violence, I guess that's the thing, is making a distinction between violence and self-defense. Actually, Nat put a quote here from, I'm sorry to be absolutely like sucking Andreas Malm's toes the whole stream, but it's a good fucking book. It rocks. Everyone should get it, right? But Nat put a quote in here that's really good from the book, okay? Or a paraphrase anyway, right? Most pacifists will say violence for self-defense is acceptable, but that's just like most other people. It's about understanding what self-defense actually means, where violence is actually coming from, and what actions are actually strategic and effective. So like, maybe throw out like the notion of pacifism for a moment and consider instead a distinction between violence and self-defense, right? It's like if your violence, if your willingness to be violent only exists in the capacity that you know other people are going to be violent to you and you want to be safe, right? That's self-defense. If your violence is because you hate a thing and you're trying to destroy it, right? That is this violence. And like, I think that's why we got to say, like, we don't endorse violence. That's why, you know, and that's again a big theme of How to Blow Up a Pipeline, is that the machinery of state that is and corporations and business as usual that is doing climate change, like directly pumping shit into the air and breaking up the ice and all of this shit, is killing us, is killing the planet. And like, the position of the book is you know, it is actually self-defense to sabotage that equipment, because otherwise it will kill us all. Like, and that I think is a very, very valid perspective on it.
Incredibly poignant. Yeah, I agree.
But yeah.
Especially when it's something like destroying equipment as being framed as violence.
Oh yeah,
is an interesting one as well. Like, it's violence when you break a piece of metal that has no feeling because it affects the bottom line of a corporation.
Near the end of the book, he talks about an action that they did where they got into an oil plant, and the only thing that they damaged was the fences on the way in. But because they hadn't made like any kind of group consensus about what kind of action they really wanted to take. They didn't like sabotage the plant or anything. Because like they just hadn't decided beforehand. So they weren't all going in prepared to be arrested for sabotaging an oil plant, which would be a pretty serious thing to commit to. But because of that, all they damaged was the fence. Nonetheless, like the CEO of the oil company, loads of the national press, and loads of conservatives were like, this disgusting violence that these climate activists are taking part in. Look at this horrific damage, this destructive violence that these climate activists are taking part in. And it's like, it'll be framed that way. It just will be framed that way. But actually, there's this self-defense thing we need to understand.
Someone's asking what book you're talking about. Could you please tell us what book?
One more time. It's How to Blow Up a Pipeline by Andreas Malm. It's very good. I'm buying it for all my lovely co-hosts for Christmas because it's so good. I want them to read it. I encourage everybody else to read it too. I will, speaking of what's going to be going on in the weeks to come, I will definitely be doing loads of book recommendations throughout. Books. Definitely part of what I'm here for. Yeah. For those who can read.
Yeah, books is hard for me. I will say, definitely ADHD, and I do find it quite hard. But this book, particularly, Sophie, you were right about this. Very big text, not too many big words, apart from gigaton that I didn't know was 1 billion tons. But yeah, pretty easy to digest.
I'll say this one: the guy likes to use big words in a specific way where it feels very show-offy, but it's also in a way where if you just don't know it, you can take a break, just Google that one word, and the rest of the sentence won't be ruined. Here's a freebie for everyone. Prima facie means on first appearance. It means first face, and this dude loves that Latin phrase, which is a bit wanky of him. He's a bit wanky in a few ways. Doesn't matter. It's still a really good book. Get the book. It rocks.
Yeah.
All right. Chat. What'd you think? Remember, let's normally at the end of every stream, I do a rate today's stream from 1 to 5 thing. So I'll do it for this stream. Rate today's stream from 1 to 5. 1 being the worst stream you've ever seen in your life. 5 being the best stream you've ever seen in your life. If you don't give me a 5, you tell me why. 6? Oh,
you got a 6?
That's
pretty
5.
10 there as
See,
well.
if they don't give you a 5, they have to explain themselves. It's already What?
Yo, people
Look
love
how
this shit.
happy they are.
Let's fucking go.
500.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Oh my god.
Wow, thank you, chatters. What a bunch of sweet chatters. Well, I had a really great time.
Yeah.
Hannah died, I swear to God. I had a really great time. Yeah, so chat, this video, the stream will be available on my channel in VODs. I'll probably make a playlist. I'll probably try to do that so it's like always there. But it'll also be on my YouTube. So !YouTube. It's Bad Bunny official clips. I will probably be rebranding in the next coming weeks, maybe. So I'll keep y'all posted on that. But make sure you follow our Twitter, which is Red Planet. It's twitter.com/Planet_TV. Yeah. Red_Planet_TV.
That's the one.
And
and next week. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. And so and also make sure that you follow all of us on Twitter as well. So my Twitter is Bad Bunny Twitch. Twitter if you want that Twitter. Sophie, what's your Twitter?
It's Sophie_FRM_Mars because I'm Sophie from Mars. And if you're looking for me on any platform, that's the name, not necessarily like that, but it's Sophie from Mars.
And you can contact us about the show if you want, if there's guests you want us to have on, if there's topics you think we should talk about. We won't be able to get to all the questions, all the comments, but I do want y'all to feel free. This is my personal opinion. I don't know about the rest of you. I want y'all to feel free to reach out to us so we can, because this is not like this isn't supposed to be some like, celebrity thing. This is like, we're actually like working together. It's just that we happen to be the faces of this particular show. And
it's no secret that I'm a big fan of Robert Evans. It's no secret that this show takes inspiration from It Could Happen Here. And one of the coolest things they've done is they talked about school boards and the struggle going on against QAnon freaks in school boards right now.
Right.
In the following week, they had a guy on who was in a school board and was engaged in that kind of struggle against the QAnon freaks and talked to an audience member about that stuff. That's incredibly cool, and I'd love to do shit like that. So genuinely, like, if we talk about something and then you go get involved and you want to talk about your experience, or if you've already been involved in something for a long time and want to talk about your experience, I'd fucking love to hear from you. Seriously.
Also, DJ Mule. I mean, some people already posted your Twitter, but if you could put
yes, you can find my Twitter in the chat. It's DJ Mule, exactly as it's spelled, underneath my head, but with an underscore afterwards.
Yeah. So DJ Mule _ awesome. Swift Arrow, thank you for the resub for 3 months. I really appreciate it. And one last thing, Rinky Ding says that they will love a schedule. Yeah, so like
we haven't shorted up yet. We've only got a few weeks,
and that goes for guests as well. Someone else asked about like when will we announce guests? So that's a great
Tim's
question.
Twitter as well. Tim's Twitter is in the chat.
Yeah.
Oh,
Tim is Dread Conquest on Twitter. Yeah. We don't have the schedule short up right this second. We have a few things loosely planned. We don't have the guests sorted. We will post it on our Twitter again, red_planet_TV when it's ready. So just watch out there, and we'll let you know.
Well, next week is definitely charity versus mutual aid.
Yes, the one we know and we can say for sure is next week we are talking about charity versus mutual aid. What's the distinction? Why do you want to build mutual aid? Why is charity serving the capitalist system? It's something that people, don't necessarily like to think of charity as, because they like to think charity is good. But we're exposing the truth. we're gonna cancel charity.
Get ready for charity to be cancelled.
Yeah, but we're gonna talk about mutual aid versus charity next week. Same time, same channel. It's gonna be fucking awesome.